Welcome back to The Splash Live. This is Diane Siobhan alongside Tyler Kieft. So, in the past few weeks and also this whole summer, Michigan is experiencing a very unusual weather patterns. So, why is that? We got Rich Pollman from the National Weather Services here with us to discuss all about this and explain all these things. Rich, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, happy to be here.
I hope you didn't have a tough week last week. I understand you were too busy, always monitoring this weather, which was very unusual and unlikely.
Yeah, it has been a fairly busy period here in southern Lower Michigan from about mid-June until last week. Get a little bit of a breather this week, and I think we all can appreciate some cooler weather and not as much severe weather coming up this week.
I hope so too. I hope this beautiful Monday stretches out for the rest of the week as well. Rich, can you please tell us about what is causing this severity in the weather? As I said, usually people around here are talking about this. Like, this is not a Michigan summer. What's going on? Can you please explain to us a little bit more about that?
And sure. So in southern Lower Michigan, we do run the risk of severe storms. We actually have been in a period over the last 5 or 6 years where we've actually been remarkably quiet in terms of severe weather. And so we're actually getting back to a little bit of a pattern that we had in the early 2000s through about 2014 when active severe weather patterns were a little bit more common. And the reason for this is that we're on the edge of that heat dome that's been affecting the southern U.S. and the southwest U.S. and a cooler air mass that's over eastern Canada. And so that puts us right in the storm track between those two air masses. And so we'll see a lot of warm fronts and cold fronts moving through southern Lower Michigan. And going back to our elementary weather classes, where that clash of the air masses, when we go from that warm, moist, unstable air back to these cool, dry summer days, when we make that change in the air mass, that's when we see our severe weather. We just happen to be in that storm track where this is happening a little more often, especially from about mid-June until last week. It's been a very active pattern.
So, as you said, it's gonna stay for a while right now. So, what do we expect for like the coming weeks or the rest of the summer and fall?
So when we look ahead and for the upcoming week or so, we do see our next cold front moving through on Thursday into Friday. So later this week, we will have a risk of thunderstorms. Maybe a little too early to pinpoint what the severe weather threat is on a forecast that is 4 or 5 days out. But we will have to watch and see if that manifests into a severe weather threat. Overall, when we look ahead to the rest of August and into the fall, August looks to be normal temperatures and normal precipitation. And so that does mean we'll run the risk of a few thunderstorms that may get severe. And then as we get into the fall, we are expecting our weather pattern to be a little bit warmer than average. So maybe in those cases, we still run the risk of some severe weather. But as we get into the fall season, severe weather doesn't become as prominent of a threat to southern Lower Michigan. So once we get through about mid-September, our severe weather days really start to drop off. And falls in southern Lower Michigan tend to be very nice, warm and dry.
That's great. I mean, I'm always looking forward for warmer weather during the fall in Michigan. So, we hear people talking a lot about how climate change might have an effect on our weather. So how likely or what are the connections that we have? Is this like a global warming or climate change kind of thing? Or is it just, as you said earlier, something that we pass through every few years?
For this season specifically, there really isn't any indication with climate change. Uh, when we look at individual thunderstorms, it's hard to see any sort of fingerprints of climate change on that. Where we're most likely to see the impacts of climate change is when we get into our heavy rain days. Those heavy rain days tend to have more precipitation, leading to more potential of flooding events. And that's where we really can see the effects of climate change when it impacts Southeast Lower Michigan. So any of our severe weather that we've had this year really is difficult to see the impacts of climate change on those individual severe weather events that we had, like especially last week when we had our big windstorm. This is it's a small localized storm, even though it affected all of Metro Detroit. On a global scale, it's a small localized storm, and so it's really kind of hard to see that fingerprint. What we can tie a little bit closer to climate change is that massive heat wave that they're having out west. And that certainly has the earmarks of a more intense heat wave because of climate change. And so the stable heat dome that's over the south and southwest is stronger because of climate change than what it would have been in the past.
That's thank you so much for explaining this. Of course, there's a lot that goes into it, and I understand there's long-term effects, and this should be studied even more because it's not just a local thing, right? So thank you so much for explaining all about, because people, this is what people are all talking about. It's like climate change and global warming. We just wanted to explain a little bit more about that. So one other thing is, you mentioned something about flooding. What other consequences do we expect with if this severe weather or thunderstorms continue to hail on us?
Yeah, so as we experience these severe thunderstorms, you know, the wind threat from our severe thunderstorms is pretty significant because we are in a region of the country that's surrounded by trees. And so when we get those severe thunderstorm winds and the trees topple over, we just really want people to stay inside a sturdy structure so that they're out of the harm's way of not only the lightning, but also have some sort of shelter to protect themselves from any sort of falling tree. We don't want to see anyone suffer any injuries or even some deaths. I know there was a death over the weekend from a tree falling in the wrong place at the wrong time in a house that maybe wasn't as it wasn't a part of the house that was as sheltered as the center part and the lower floor of the house when we have our severe thunderstorm warnings. So we just want people to be prepared for those severe weather events. If we do get into a flooding situation, and the period of August and September have been some of our biggest floods in southern lower Michigan. We had our August flood of 2014 in Metro Detroit, go back to 1985 and 1986 when Flint and the Saginaw Valley had two back-to-back years with floods in September of those years. This time of year is a time when I get a little more concerned about flooding here in Metro Detroit because of the heat dome that has built up over the course of the summer, and the storms don't move as quickly as they do in the springtime. And we have a lot of available moisture in August and September. This tends to be our most humid time period when we get those warm, humid days. And that's what leads to the heavy rainfall. And so slow moving storms with a lot of moisture can lead to heavy precipitation days and lead to the flooding here in southern lower Michigan. So this is the time to just be prepared, listen to the forecast. If we have a flood watch out, be prepared for that, and just be prepared for the rest of the season.
Thank you so much, sir. Those are very helpful tips. And again, we should always continue to update ourselves with the weather forecast. We got Rich Pollman and his team at the NWS always working hard for us, always working to keep us updated on the weather. So I hope that all our viewers keep themselves updated before heading out, before planning their trips. Thank you so much, Rich Pollman, for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for talking severe weather and preparedness. Great
Thank
to
you
be
so
here.
much.